Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. Donald Trump is a big believer in tariffs as part of his strategy to put America first. He's even floated the idea of 10% to 20% tariffs on all goods that we buy and bring into the United States. I'm sure you've heard about that on the news.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car. And we're all about growth. We're going to bring companies back to our country. The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States.
Tariffs are the greatest thing ever invented, and Trump said that this month in Flint, Michigan. Joe Biden kept over $300 billion worth of Trump's China tariffs and even increased some on targeted products like semiconductors, medical supplies, and lithium-ion batteries. Now you might be thinking, why are tariffs such a big deal? They must be good if both Biden and Trump use them, right? Well, it's not that simple. Many economists think tariffs are bad for the economy, inflationary, and don't have the intended benefits. But is this really correct? And what are the intended benefits? Tariffs are about negotiation, power, and control. If tariffs are inflationary and potentially drive up prices for Americans, why would any leader want to raise prices on their own people? Well, we're not just talking about today's economy. We're talking about the long game, the future of American innovation, jobs, national security, and a growing dependency on a single country that may not have Americans' best interests at heart. In this video, I'm going to explain what tariffs are, why Trump thinks that we need them, and how they could impact your wallet and your portfolio. So let's get started. Imagine this. Right now, as you watch this video, there's someone in a factory in China reverse engineering America's next big product and preparing to flood the market with knockoffs for half the price. It's happened for decades. We've all seen it. China uses its extremely cheap labor force to recreate American products, usually lower quality versions, and then China sells them to us online, helping to reduce demand for higher priced American goods. And I'm guilty, I bought some of these lower quality products online, and they definitely aren't as good. Often American prices are higher because of the enhanced quality and higher incomes that are paid to US workers. But that's not all. As we found out a few years back, the United States is very reliant on China for really important goods. Things like oxygen masks, protective suits, ventilators, and other medical goods. In early 2020, shipments of those items to the US plummeted as China hoarded them for their own people's needs, leaving the US with a shortage of these goods when we needed them the most. Even before 2020, 90% of surgical masks and 70% of respirators used in the US were imported. We are also very reliant on China for critical elements of battery technology and car parts like semiconductor chips and lithium battery technology. These three categories are primarily why we have such a large trade deficit with China. We buy a heck of a lot more goods from China than we sell to China. And it could put our own economy in peril when we rely so much on one country. So what exactly are tariffs? At their core, tariffs are taxes or duties imposed by a government on imported goods, items that we buy brought into the US from overseas. The idea behind them is to make foreign products more expensive and less competitive compared to domestic goods. In the past, tariffs have had both good and bad results. In theory, this should help level the playing field and incentivize us to buy more goods made in the US. Typically, those US companies would sell more of their own products. Well, this sounds good, right? Well, I think most of us love the phrase buy local and want to support goods that are made in the USA. But did you know that the business buying the good from another country actually pays the additional tax? That's right. The US business pays the increased cost of the tariff, and these taxes go directly to the US government. Of course, many times when a business has an increased cost, that cost gets passed on to the consumer in the form of higher prices. Here's why tariffs have become such a hot topic today. The US produces so few essential goods domestically that it relies heavily on imports from countries like China. This dependency on China is especially evident in areas like technology, manufacturing components, and even basic consumer goods. But it wasn't always this way. Decades ago, China and the US had great trade relations. China supplied a lot of the commodity-based raw materials for the high-quality goods that were produced in the US. And because they were able to deliver the raw materials at relatively low cost, it allowed the US to make cost-effective products. And China loved the dependable, high-volume orders that flowed from the US. So both countries benefited. But at some point, China began to copy the products that they were supplying the raw materials for, and were able to produce similar products as the US at a much lower cost. They began flooding these low-cost products into the US market, and now the US is in a pickle. Highly reliant on China for important and sometimes critical raw materials and manufacturing. And it's not just about what we're buying. It's about the policies in place and the contract deals that we make with other nations. Right now, the US trade deficit stands at a staggering $1.1 trillion. In other words, the US has bought $1.1 trillion more in goods outside the US than foreign countries have bought from the US. And guess who holds the largest trade surplus? Of course, it's China. This imbalance isn't just numbers, it has real implications for American jobs, manufacturing, and even national security. Let's have a look at the top 20 countries with the highest trade surplus. These are the countries that are selling more goods than they are buying from everyone else. If we were playing a game, you would want to ideally be neutral, one for one. But this is not how it's worked. There they are. China, number one at over $800 billion. Number two is Germany. Maybe surprising, but think about German cars. But also Germany is Europe's leading semiconductor production location. These are some great exports for them. These are the countries who are consistently selling more to other countries than they're buying internally. Does this seem fair to you? Maybe things should be renegotiated, and that's where tariffs or the threat of tariffs come in. The trade war with China is about playing the long game, reducing reliance on one country for so many critical raw materials, bringing back manufacturing and jobs to the United States to create those raw materials, and protecting the IP or the intellectual property of the high quality goods that the US does produce. Tariffs aren't new. They've been used as economic tools for centuries. One notable example is the McKinley tariffs of 1890. Yes, we're going back to 1890. They were used as a protectionist strategy to support US manufacturing, like in the steel industry. These tariffs were designed to shield domestic manufacturers from foreign competition, and they worked. Manufacturing output in the US surged, doubling by 1913, and we saw an economic boom that helped the US become one of the largest industrial producers in the world at that time. But tariffs haven't always had positive effects. Take the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of the 1930s. It raised taxes on over 20,000 imported goods, intending to protect American industries during the Great Depression. Instead, it backfired spectacularly, and many countries retaliated with their own tariffs, sparking a global trade war that caused international trade to plummet. US exports fell drastically and unemployment skyrocketed. So rather than helping stimulate growth during the Depression, these tariffs actually caused global trade to sputter, raised unemployment even higher. When it comes to Trump's economic strategy, one word comes up repeatedly: tariffs. His plan? On the campaign trail, he suggested a sweeping policy to impose a blanket of tariffs of 10% to 20% on all imports, with even larger tariffs of 60% to 100% on goods coming from China. Trump describes tariffs as a way to both protect American jobs and raise funds for the US government. In his words, tariffs would finally make other countries pay us back for all that we've done for the world. Trump argues that a strong tariff policy could generate revenue to offset losses from lower income taxes. He sees tariff revenue as being able to reduce the deficit and even help Americans solve its child care crisis by using the taxes to help Americans pay for child care. It appears that Trump is playing the long game here, trying to reset trade agreements and stimulate U.S. economic growth. But at what cost? I assume that he realizes that because the tariffs are actually paid by US businesses, those businesses will most likely pass on those increased costs to US consumers by raising prices. According to some outlets, these increases are almost like a hidden tax on consumers, who in many cases are already tapped out. According to the Peterson Institute, they originally estimated a $1,700 cost to the typical household from tariffs. That figure has just been increased to $2,600 a year, and I've seen some estimates of almost $4,000 a year as an increase. Short term, that hurts consumers with higher prices for goods that we buy. No one would be happy about that. But the real question is if US-based businesses would then move manufacturing back into the US, stimulating jobs and raising incomes. That would be the ideal benefit, an offset to those potentially higher prices. How high would tariffs need to go before US businesses bought from other US manufacturers? That's a key question. Trump also talks a lot about lowering energy costs by making America energy independent. Reduced energy costs could be extremely impactful if they come to pass, lowering the burden of increased prices of other goods. In effect, tariffs become a balancing act, protecting American jobs and industries on one side, while possibly raising consumer prices and risking economic backlash on the other. But is this plan good or bad? Well, Adam Smith, one of history's most influential economists, argued that free trade is the best path to economic prosperity. According to Smith, unrestricted competition leads to the most efficient economic outcomes. Keep the government out of trade and let countries and companies freely exchange goods. But even he noted an exception. Tariffs could be used to protect industries that are essential for national defense and critical infrastructure. The goals of the Trump tariff plan are clear. Bring manufacturing back to the U.S., reduce dependency on foreign countries, and strengthen American industries. High tariffs could indeed encourage companies to start producing goods domestically again, creating jobs and making the U.S. more self-reliant. But the big question remains, at what cost? From a business perspective, tariffs are likely to lead to higher costs. I already brought that up. And as we know, these costs often get passed down to consumers, driving up prices and refueling a reacceleration of inflation. Given that Americans are already tapped out with the inflation of the past 4 years, how on earth can we expect to pay even higher cost? Short-term pain for long-term gain? Well, not when most people are living paycheck to paycheck. The key to this working will be if energy costs can come down enough to offset the increasing costs everywhere else. Transportation costs for businesses shipping goods around the world and for consumers driving to and from work could be greatly reduced through lower energy costs. And so too could home heating. That's the bet that Trump is making. Will he be able to pull it off? We will see. If we can get through any shorter term pain, in the long term, there's potential for a revival of many key U.S. industries if high tariffs make domestic production more viable. So what does this tariff strategy mean for your portfolio? I could be wrong, but unfortunately my base case is for a reacceleration of inflation. Over the past 2 months, longer-term interest rates have been moving upward. Now that could be because the financial markets are anticipating a return of inflation or a robust economic growth environment. If you believe inflation is an increasing threat to the economy and your personal finances, you want to make sure that you have a portfolio with assets that do well in times of inflation. And what assets are those? Just look back to the best performers of the past 4 years as inflation accelerated. I actually did a video on the subject and you can check it out. I'll link to it in the description. Now, generally, in times of inflation, the assets that do the worst are those with fixed rates that can't adjust to higher inflation. Think bonds. And assets that typically do well when inflation accelerates are things like stocks with dividends that increase over time, rental real estate where rents could increase over time, and commodities and precious metals. Additionally, non-traditional investments like artwork and other collectibles have typically done better during inflationary times. But investing in those assets doesn't come without risks. Those assets can often be more volatile than traditional savings accounts or bonds and could decline in value. But throughout history, they have often maintained and even increased purchasing power during inflationary times. Secondly, with a focus on stimulating U.S. manufacturing and business, along with lowering energy costs, investing in small and mid-cap U.S. stocks that do more of their business in the U.S. could be an attractive theme, and investments in energy that make us more efficient. If the tariffs are successful, or the threat of tariffs allow U.S. companies to sell more goods, then you may want exposure to small and mid-sized U.S. companies where the majority of their revenue comes within the borders of the United States. And Trump has blatantly said that he favors more domestic energy production. How many times have you seen that? But that doesn't just mean oil, natural gas, and coal. It means nuclear energy. Trump in August vowed,
Starting on day one, I will approve new drilling, new pipelines, new refineries, new power plants, new reactors.
It seems likely that Trump 2.0 would build on the nuclear investments that were made during his first administration and the Biden administration's pro-nuclear stance. Each of these potential investments comes with pros and cons, and you should discuss them with your financial advisor to see if they make sense for your portfolio. Don't just take my word for it. Now, the road ahead will likely require careful consideration of which industries need the most support, how to handle international relationships, and perhaps most importantly, how to safeguard the purchasing power of American families. Personally, I think a widespread use of tariffs is counterproductive, but the threat of tariffs and targeted tariffs designed to support industries of critical infrastructure could be really helpful. I don't think we ever want to get in a predicament of not being able to get our hands on items that we need to live in a timely fashion. So what's your opinion on these imposed tariffs? Are they good? Are they bad? Let me know down in the comments. And if you're looking to supercharge your finances, watch this video next.